Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Bracken. I'm the president and CEO of the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to our fourth in a series of webinars co-hosted by ourselves and NJM Insurance Group. All of our webinars are really looking at the issues facing small business today, and there's no shortage of challenges, as you all know, to your companies, and we have been trying to address those challenges and help you get some education on how you might deal with those challenges. Today's focus is on ways companies can protect their data. Our guests will discuss the liabilities of data breaches, including types of insurance to be used, and also the technology needed to avoid the breaches in the first place. Before we begin, let me just make a suggestion that if you have questions, please use our chat box. We will try to get to as many questions as possible after the presentations today. I would like to thank NJM Insurance Group for continuing to be our partner in this series of webinars that we've had. They have been a great corporate sponsor of ours and partner of ours for years, and they're also one of the finest corporate citizens in the state of New Jersey and now in other states, so they've expanded their horizons. So with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce Ed Mikulik, the Commercial Lines Director at NJM Insurance Group. Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, all. I'm Ed Mikulik, Director of Commercial Lines Underwriting here at NJM Insurance Group. NJM is proud to sponsor this webinar series spotlighting the issues facing small business in New Jersey. I want to thank the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to briefly speak with you today. The New Jersey Chamber of Commerce has been an essential voice for Garden State businesses for more than a century and a vocal advocate in the corridors of the capital of Trenton. NJM has been helping small businesses meet their insurance needs since 1913. We're the largest writer of workers' comp insurance in New Jersey for more than 7 decades. We're also a leading provider of commercial auto insurance. We wrote those two and only those two lines of business for the better part of a century. However, we've added new products to better serve our policyholders and potential new customers. We've expanded our footprint at the same time. NJM is now a leading regional insurer serving business customers in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and of course, New Jersey. We now offer the NJM Pro Edge Business Owners Policy, which combines protection for common property and liability risks designed for smaller businesses. We also offer the NJM Pro Pack Commercial Package Policy, which protects mid to large size businesses against property and liability risks. NJM business policyholders receive the highest levels of service, including access to our nationally recognized claim service and certified loss prevention specialists. This focus on safety, long an NJM hallmark, is to help business owners identify and correct workplace hazards before accidents occur. And if an injury should happen, our claims and medical services professionals work to mitigate losses and contain claims costs. We take pride in aligning the right coverages for our policyholders, providing an outstanding customer experience, and sharing profits in the forms of dividends. We want to help our policyholders grow and in turn grow with them. If you're not an NJM business customer, I encourage you to visit njm.com to view our agent directory, get a free quote, or contact us with any questions. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce this morning's speakers who will offer valuable guidance on data protection. Robert Egan is a partner at Archer Law Firm and chair of the firm's business litigation group. He has concentrated his practice on business-related litigation in New Jersey state and federal courts and other jurisdictions. He has significant experience in complex litigation involving the computer and high-tech technology sectors. Bob also serves as the chair of Archer's Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Group. Also joining us is Michael A. Barson, Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of VoIP Doctors Business Telecom. Michael leads the VoIP Doctors technology and engineering teams who help clients modernize their business telecommunications strategies. He also oversees systems architecture and strategy for clients, working with small and mid-sized business and enterprise organizations on cybersecurity-focused VoIP services and consulting. Our third panelist is Bradford Barron, a partner and managing deputy general counsel for Connor Strong and Bucklew. He supports the Office of General Counsel's corporate duties and provides advice on various coverage matters, including cyber insurance, for the firm's commercial lines division. In addition, he assists Connor Strong & Bucklow's claims department on complex claims to ensure that the firm's clients maximize their coverage per their insurance policies. Like you, I'm looking forward to hearing Bob, Michael, and Bradford. Please join me in welcoming Michael Barson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Barson, the Chief Technology and Solutions Officer of VoIP Doctors, a cybersecurity-focused telecommunications company based in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. My company secures telecommunications systems, both hardware and software, which is likely something that not many of you have considered as a vulnerable point. But working in security, I'm aware of the cybersecurity challenges businesses face, and I'm passionate about alerting you to the dangers your businesses face and might suggest some cost-effective ways that you can adapt. Within the realm of cybersecurity, prevention is not enough. With all of the ransomware attacks and cybersecurity data breaches over the course of the past couple of years, it's a matter of when will it happen to your organization, not if. Most recently, we heard about the data breach that affected Central State Medical Center. Somerset County recently had a breach as well, back in May of 22, that affected their email and IT systems. Freedom Mortgage had one where scammers got access to over $250,000 in payments. Going back a little further, Livingston Public Schools in 2019, hackers were able to hold data hostage for 9 different schools within the district. Englewood Health had a data breach which affected just under 4,000 people. And Final Site, which is a website that hosts websites for over 8,000 schools around the world, suffered a ransomware attack, leading to educational institutions not having websites accessible for multiple hours. Prevention and recovery. These are the 2 categories to keep in mind when devising your cybersecurity plan. As I mentioned, prevention is not enough, but it is the start. Your business needs to be ready for when the breach happens and what to do after the attack. Small and medium-sized businesses are prime targets. A good example is Meta, Facebook, and Apple. Over the course of the past couple of years, they've had several small contracting clients where they were not secure enough, and then both Facebook and Apple were hacked through those small contracting firms. Recovery, what to do after a cybersecurity event. The main questions you need to ask are, how much data are you willing to lose? How much time are you willing to lose? And more importantly, how much money are you willing to lose? Investing in a good cybersecurity plan, on average, tends to be less expensive than paying the ransom to gain access to your data. As you can see from this estimated chart, ransomware is big business, and it's only going to keep increasing. With the advent of ChatGPT and hackers being able to circumvent the malware fail-safes within it, ransomware and other cybersecurity breaches likely will start increasing tenfold. On average, it is just under $1,200 a year to secure per employee on your network. That's approximately $100 a month per employee for the peace of mind of not needing to pay $250,000 plus just to recover your data, if the breach does end up costing you. Recovery. This is essential. Backup policies. There are multiple different types of backup policies that your organization can have. With this, I would recommend discussing with your managed service provider or IT company or IT department if you happen to have one in-house. Typically, backups should follow the 3-2-1 rule. What this says is you're going to have 3 copies of your data, One is going to be your on-site data, and 2 backups. With the backups, it needs to be on 2 different types of storage mediums. For example, one can be cloud hosted, which fits the last rule, which is the offsite backup. And then another should be on tape or disk or something else that can be stored in-house or off on another site. But this needs to be discussed with your managed service provider or IT staff to ensure that you have good backup sets. And those backup sets need to be tested at regular intervals to ensure data integrity is intact and to reinforce the recovery policies to ensure a speedy recovery after your data has been breached, a ransomware attack, or anything like that. Prevention. The top 3 things that you can do. A solid cybersecurity audit. As mentioned on the left, these are just some of the things that your managed service provider or cybersecurity firm may be looking at. If you notice the last one on the list, as I mentioned in my intro, a lot of you may not have thought about telecom, but in the voice over IP world, we have recently consulted with several small businesses here in New Jersey that have been breached ransomware and hacks directly through their voice provider switches. So it is very much something that can really happen. And also obviously make sure your security patches are there, as well as your hardware and software is up to date. Again, your managed service provider will help with that. Training. Training for your employees is key, including all the way up through management. Everyone needs to be abreast of all of the top threats that could be affecting your organization. And lastly, multi-factor authentication. This is one of the key things that you can do today. And it is so key, I made it its own slide. If you do not have multi-factor authentication enabled, turn it on right after this call. What multi-factor authentication says is, or what it does, is you go to log into a website, you then get pinged on your cell phone, either through an authenticator app, which is my preferred method, or via text message or email code. And then you can gain access by putting in that code or unlocking it through, say, the Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator apps. There are several others out there. But this does help prevent an intrusion into your data by giving that extra layer of security. Training. People are always going to be the weak link, so training is essential. These are some scam text messages and some scam emails. Just to give you an idea of what can go on. And what I'm showing in the middle is actually one of the more important ones. The bogus email from Wells Fargo. If you were to hover over the link in an email, and this should be common practice in every organization, hover over links if you're not sure where the email originated from. You can see where that link is going to take you. So you might not be able to open it up on your cell phone, but definitely on the computer, just hover the mouse over it and you'll see the actual link on where that link is going to go or where that click is going to take you. And if it's not Microsoft or your bank or someplace that you know you're going to go to, immediately mark it as spam or forward it over to your cybersecurity firm and just note in the subject line that you believe that this is spam and you would like them to check on it. Also, some other things to look out for. If you notice the UPS one up on top, be very cautious of anything that's a tiny URL or things that look sort of legitimate, but sort of not. For example, the OneNote one, the domain name is wrong. It's one-note. That's obviously not how Microsoft has their domain name. And the MNT one, the .page obviously looks wrong. And also the spacing is off in that message. The National Security Department one, they will, I'm sorry, the National Security Department one, they will never ask for FaceTime verification. Being proactive. Security assessments. The old rule of thumb used to be do a security assessment annually. Going forward with the way the world is evolving, with the cybersecurity threats increasing, annually might not be the recommendation that most cybersecurity firms are going to be presenting going forward. They should be done sooner, mainly because, as I mentioned, it's pretty much point and click nowadays for people to create viruses, to create malware, and all that, especially with the advent of AI. Be proactive. Penetration testing on your network is essential. It will determine what ports are open. And what that says is what services or what paths can an intruder take to gain access to your network. So definitely make sure that your cybersecurity firm is doing pen testing and review your cybersecurity policies and procedures. It is a living document, so they will need to be revised over time as the threats change. If you were to contract with a managed service provider or a cybersecurity company directly, they have virtual chief information officers and virtual chief information security officers that can provide additional information and resources. Conclusion, rinse and repeat. Ransomware is typically cheaper to pay for the preventative costs as opposed to the alternative of paying the ransom. Make sure your backup sets are always good. Regularly test them, and that'll help to maintain your data. Also, outside of the realm of cybersecurity, if an employee accidentally deletes a folder, it's very good to have backups just in case you need to restore. Prevention, multi-factor authentication, enable this today. Training and security assessments are key, and everyone, again, in the organization needs to be trained that will be accessing any piece of technology that connects to your network. So even if it's just someone coming in that's using their cell phone, they should be trained as well, as long as they're obviously not a guest for the day. Confirm the latest threats with technology professionals and make sure everyone is up to date. Review and refine your policy over time. As I mentioned, it is a living document, so the threats will change over time and the response to those threats will change over time. Most likely, one of the responses that'll change is how quickly you can recover your data. As everyone gets more and more familiar with how to respond to these, the recovery time will hopefully get less. And obviously, ensure that you have appropriate legal and insurance advice for prior and after a breach happens. And I thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I now give you Bob Egan.
Sorry for the delay. I'm attempting to share my screen, and I got the wrong one. Sorry, folks. That share. All right. All right, I think we're good. Okay, well, good morning. So Michael just outlined the data security risks and the threats that you face, which, by now are pretty well known and should make it at least a little bit nervous. My job now is to scare the heck out of you on the legal side. I'm going to mainly discuss what the law requires of businesses that have personal information about other people. A lot does apply. What I'm going to have to say does apply to your own data. And as a general statement, as time goes on, the law is expanding, imposing more and more obligations on businesses. There's a lot to cover. I apologize if I raced through this stuff too quickly. But I'll do my best to get this stuff across to you. So before we get a look at the legal specifics, I want to be sure I get across three main recommendations. First, you can't ignore the risks and just hope for the best. You need to pay attention to all cyber risks and how you should defend against them. You have to engage in a process, and to do so, you should retain professionals who are experienced in cybersecurity and data privacy areas on the three areas that are shown on this slide. Just because a person, quote, does something with computers doesn't make him or her an expert in IT security or in cyber planning. And the same is true for lawyers. A general lawyer doesn't know enough about this stuff in order to be able to best advise you. Third, get cyber insurance. in this space, as I'm sure Brad's going to tell you, one size does not fit all. You can't buy a cyber policy off the shelf. You have to get one that's tailored to your business. And to do so, be sure to use a broker with experience placing cyber insurance. And the last point about all of this is that all the expenses you incur on these items are scalable to the size and budget of your business. You don't have an obligation to go bankrupt just to protect against the data breach and its consequences. All right, let's get into some of the specifics of the requirements of the applicable laws. There are a lot of laws, some are very dense, and we're going to try to move quickly through the slides discussing the legal details, and I'll try to focus on the practical advice. There are two general types of laws relevant to the protection of personal information about people. One are data privacy laws, the other are data security laws that address cybersecurity and data breaches. As to data privacy laws, they impose obligations on some business relating to the collection, storage, use, and sharing of data about individuals. And they give the individuals certain rights over the management, sale, and use of that personal data. Now, there are a lot of these laws. There are many, they're varied, and they're growing. There are 5 states in the United States that have them now. There's international laws along these lines, particularly in the European Union. There are 30 bills pending in 30 states. These generally target larger organizations that operate in or collect the data of residents in a given location, state or a country, no matter where the business is established. So if you're a New Jersey business and you have information about a California resident, even though you're not in California, that statute applies to you. And generally, these data privacy laws apply to information that can identify an individual. And there are some examples I have on this slide, number 7. Generally, names, addresses, and numbers that can help a bad guy identify an individual. So what does this mean for the run-of-the-mill business? And here's my advice to you. If you collect, store, or transmit personal information about individuals, you should consult lawyers who are experienced in data privacy law. This is particularly so if you have a website through which you collect that sort of information. Generally, initial consultations to figure out what you need to do based upon your business practices don't take long and don't require a lot of expense. So I'm going to turn now to the laws that apply to data security and data breaches. And there are generally 2 aspects to these data breach laws. First, what you need to do to try to prevent data breaches. And secondly, what you need to do if you suffer a data breach or even suspect that you may have suffered a data breach. And like data privacy laws, there's a patchwork of laws that may apply, some state, some federal, some international, and some apply to just specific industries. This slide has a list of the specific regulated industries that have data security laws that apply to them. And these next 2 slides, and I'm going to quickly run through, show you a list of potentially applicable federal laws, and obviously there are a lot of them. So what types of information do the data breach laws typically cover? Some are pretty obvious: social security numbers, credit card numbers, and codes that will give you access to a credit card account, and some not, such as biometric data or even an email address if it's coupled with a password that allows access to the email account. And these apply not just to customers, but in many respects to, in many circumstances, to your employees as well. So let's focus on the data breach prevention. What do the laws, particularly state laws, require? Well, there's no one answer. The trend is to impose obligations on businesses to take, quote, reasonable measures to prevent unauthorized access to protected information. In other words, to prevent a hack. So the next question is, well, what are reasonable measures? What measures are reasonable? And again, no defined guidelines or specific requirements. But one thing is quite clear: doing nothing is not reasonable. If you don't do anything about it and do some of the things I'm going to tell you about, some of the things Michael told you about, you're exposing yourself on a number of fronts, including to liability. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to engage in a process of assessing the risks that are specific to your business and then determine the appropriate measures to take. These are scalable, as I said before, to your company size and cost. And you can never be 100% certain that you have prevented all hacks. So you can always do more in some sense, but that doesn't mean you have to in order to comply with legal requirements. So I want to stop here for a moment and issue a warning about agreements. It's becoming trendy for business to business and vendor agreements to contain provisions that impose specific cybersecurity requirements and specifications. So even if these statutes I'm talking about don't apply to you, you may have an obligation hidden in some documents and agreements that you sign, or depending upon what your business is, you may want to put those provisions in agreements that you make with other people. So I just want to make mention of that. So let's put some meat on the bones of the process that I mentioned. What is it that you should do from square one? Well, first, you got to get help from experts who are knowledgeable in the field. Talk to an insurance broker who has a background in this. There's no reason not to. Consult an attorney. Unless you're certain that you don't have someone's personal data, including employees. That's the only circumstance, in my view, that you should not at least speak to an attorney to see where you stand and see where you need to go. And then retain data security professionals who will do the work that Michael outlined. So just quickly, what is it that all these experts can do? Mike, I think, went through a good bit of stuff about data security professionals, but mainly they're going to assess risks and evaluate your security measures. They're going to recommend and implement further measures you can take, both from a technical perspective and policies, corporate policies, employee policies. Most importantly, they should develop what they call an incident response plan, which is a plan that is ready to go if you have a breach or think you may have breached, and assembles a team that will address those circumstances. And the various people who could be on that team are shown on the slide that's on your screen. How about lawyers? How about them? There are a number of things that experienced attorneys can do to help you reduce your risks. One, obviously, compliance with data privacy laws, drafting, reviewing, editing contracts that concern data, and helping you draft appropriate employee policies of various kinds, and things that relate to codes of conduct, email privacy, internet security, BYOD policies. So I say you should consider this and not necessarily retain attorneys. I went over this before, because things vary depending upon the nature of your business, the information you have, and your online presence. But my view is that unless you're certain you're in the clear, that it's good to pick up the phone and talk to an attorney. The old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All right, now, remember what we discussed about the law requiring you to take reasonable measures to prevent unauthorized access, and how it doesn't lay out specifics, but requires you to engage in the process and the risk assessment process that I described. This slide has a list of things that businesses can do on their own without a lot of outside contractor help and expense. Michael outlined a good number of them. And the first three on this slide are often overlooked, which is basically to minimize the data that you have and limit access to that data to people in your organization who need to know, and then get rid of data after you no longer need it. Now, the measures that I've listed on this slide don't cost much. Many cost nothing. And in my view, there's virtually no excuse for not adopting them. So why go through this process? Michael covered a number of these things. These lists the many potential costs of a data breach, some obvious, not so obvious, and the loss of your own data is sometimes overlooked, particularly in light of the ever increasing ransomware threats that Mike described. Not all of these costs that are listed on this slide are covered by cyber policies. So it makes sense for businesses to be proactive in order to address these prevention issues. So that's prevention. Let's turn now to data breach response. So despite doing all the stuff I talked about, all the stuff that Michael talked about, you've been hacked, or you discover that somebody may have gotten unauthorized access to your computer system and data. What should you do? Legally, there's another patchwork of state and federal laws that apply. Several may apply to a single data breach. They vary. There's different definitions of a breach. What is a security breach? Issues regarding notice that you may have to give to the data subjects, the individuals whose data you have, to any governmental agencies, and to credit agencies. So it's a complex set of laws out there. And they are the types of things they address I've listed on these slides. All right. So what do you do if you get information that indicates you might have suffered a data breach? Well, first of all, you can't ignore it, and you got to get a move on to address it. Execute the incident response plan that you have hopefully made based on advice that you've gotten, whether in this webinar or elsewhere. And there are 3 phone calls that need to be made in some order and made quickly. Lawyers, your IT people, and your insurance broker. I would get on that as soon as possible. If you have cyber insurance, the cyber insurance company will appoint what's called a breach coach. And that breach coach will usually direct the response to the incident and guide you through it. Next, contain the damage. Get advice about what you need to do from a technical perspective. I defer, of course, to the technical experts along these lines, but there are 3 items on the slide that are very common in my experience in handling data breaches as to how you contain the damage. Next thing you have to do is investigate and assess. Here, you may need to retain technical forensic experts to do that. Usually the insurance company will get involved in that decision. You have to figure out what data was accessed or exfiltrated, copied. You then have to go through the process of figuring out what notice is required, to whom, what law applies, and you need help in order to do that. On the technical side, my advice is that you use outside experts to conduct the technical investigation, not just your own IT employees or independent contractors or MSPs, managed service providers. I've had data breaches that I've been involved in where these folks kind of feel they're in the crosshairs and that they might be responsible for the breach, or somebody might think they're responsible for the breach. And sometimes it's human nature. They may not be objective and candid. So I would make sure that outside experts are involved in the technical investigation. Couple more. You might have to notify, and here there is a need for speed. Different laws require notice to be given in different timeframes, depending upon the nature of the breach and the data involved and the states that are involved. You need to get moving on your investigation in order to be able to make that decision. If notice is required, your insurance carrier or your regular company attorney will have to be involved. I generally recommend that even if you have coverage, that you keep your regular company attorney involved in the circumstances. There may be issues that come up, some of which could involve the scope of coverage, some of which can involve other issues. But I would keep your regular company attorney involved. You may have to offer credit monitoring and identity theft insurance to the data subjects. Insurance companies can nail this quickly for you and make the decisions that are involved. And then the last step is to fix the vulnerabilities. You need to remediate them. And Mike addressed this a little bit. You got to fix the problem, but you can't at that point rest on your laurels and think that you've fixed it for all time. You have to periodically assess and make whatever needed changes in response to a lot of things, including changing legal requirements, changing technology. So that's, hopefully I got it done in time. That's my advice to you all. And I guess with that, I can turn it over to Brad on the insurance piece. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I know this is the part that everyone has been waiting for, discussion about insurance. So we'll try to make it as exciting as possible. So I think it's important just to point out what Bob and Michael have already said. You know, cybercrime is a huge industry. Some of the estimates have it as a $6 trillion total industry in terms of the cost of trying to protect yourself, the cost of lost time, goods, services, all those things. And that puts it, you know, if you looked at it on a global scale, the number 3 item in terms of GDP if it were its own country. And I think it's sort of backed up by what I heard yesterday. I was actually in a meeting with the special agent of the FBI who's in charge of the Washington field office's cyber task force. And their top 3 priorities are number 1, counterterrorism, number 2, foreign counterintelligence, and number 3, cybercrime. So I think that gives you a sense of where resources are being deployed, especially by our law enforcement agencies, in trying to stop this scourge. And that's the difficult part. Like Michael and Bob said, it's more trying to prevent, make it so that you're resilient. It's almost impossible to stop. So what are we trying to stop? I think you've heard from Michael and Bob, really ransomware. Everyone's heard about that. Business email compromise. That's the one that we're seeing the most of as brokers. All of our clients sort of report through us. We're seeing a lot of business email compromise. That's where someone kind of gets in your email, and the most likely outcome of that we've seen is an attempt to divert funds. The old, you know, hey, we've changed our wire instructions. Please send the amount of money you owe me to our new bank account at wherever it might be. And it doesn't take long for that money to disappear overseas. Hackers, human error, third-party vendor. I think that's one that a lot of folks sort of forget about, or maybe think that it's on someone else's. You know, all of us have third-party vendors, especially on the software side. And just because we're secure doesn't mean that our third-party vendors are secure. And they can be holding important data for us, important data about our clients, and or be holding or doing important jobs for us. And obviously the result of all those is generally it's going to cost money, as Michael and Bob told you. Whether we lose those funds directly, we lose the opportunity to run our business for a few days, or it costs us to bring in a professional and help clean up the mess. So what are we talking about when we're talking about money here? You know, when we look at the net diligence report, it's been anywhere from $1,000 for small businesses up to $300 million for larger businesses. The average that we've sort of seen a lot of different publications throw around is, you know, in the low hundreds, the high tens of thousands of dollars. So $170,000 for all claims. I've seen some estimated at $60,000, but it's not insignificant no matter which way you slice it. And I think you can see here, you know, when you look at it, business interruption is a critical part of that. That's sort of the cost of you not being able to do business for however long a period of time that you and your folks are diverted to dealing with whatever the issue might be that the criminals or threat actors have perpetrated. So cyber insurance, you know, this is the real fun part, right? You know, when we look at our carrier partners, you know, the numbers are still being tallied from last year, but in 2021, all-time high of ransomware. You know, they lock up your system, they're going to hold it hostage until you pay them some amount in Bitcoin. And then hopefully the key that you get back works, and hopefully you're able to get access to your system over the course of days, if not weeks. And so what we're seeing on the insurance side is obviously the costs of premium going up because these claim costs are going up as well. The encryption is harder to crack, so it's very unlikely we're able to get law enforcement assistance on that to help crack a code, or they might already have a key. But the ransomware cost itself, the amount of ransom they're demanding is going up, and the amount of time it's taking to unencrypt your system goes up. We're also seeing it for those of you who have cyber insurance, maybe as part of a package policy or standalone, you've probably on your application had to answer an increasing number of questions about your security stance. And a lot of these carriers are starting to sort of have a baseline requirement. And so what are they demanding of you? So like Michael and Bob talked about, multi-factor authentication is sort of necessary now. If you don't have it, it's unlikely someone is going to be willing to insure you because it's considered such a baseline protection. Endpoint detection and response, as Michael talked about earlier, segregation of backups from the network. So offline backups don't do any good if they're connected to your system because the threat actors are going to move laterally and vertically. So if they're connected to your system, it's great that you have backups. They just become another thing that's now encrypted if they're connected. And certain carriers are going to require certain protocols to be put into effect. Like, hey, you need to have a policy on wire transfers. You need to have a policy on patching. You know, what we hear quite frequently are the two biggest issues are human error. So people get tricked. And then we hear about things where patching is not occurring. So for those of you, whether you have internal or external resources, making certain you're on a good patching schedule, those two things can really prevent the vast majority of issues in terms of the things that we've seen. And that's, you know, you hear these 0-day sort of exploits that are coming out, making certain you're patching immediately as soon as that's known, because once that list of exploits comes out, what do we all think the cyber criminals are doing? They are now creating ways to exploit those exploits so they can live in that gap before everyone goes and patches and fixes those problems. I won't go through all these, but these are some of the other demands we're seeing of carriers. These are sort of, you know, hey, if you don't have it, they're not even going to give you a quote. One of the things that we think is the most important, again, is employee training. You know, human factor is the most likely cause of an attack, someone clicking on something, someone getting tricked. And so it's really important to ramp up that training if you're able and you haven't done it already. For those who are on the fence about cyber insurance, I'm a zealot about getting it, and I think it's really helpful. But you have to consider all of your potential avenues. So unless everyone in your company and everyone at your vendor never gets tricked, sets up their system perfectly, never makes a mistake, I guess you don't need insurance. Otherwise, you should consider insurance a must-have. You know, and this goes, there's an attack that happened a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's illustrative of that it's not always a technical type of attack where, oh, someone figured out how to get in my system. We have some clients in the hospitality industry, and the threat actors figured out who their technology vendor was through using LinkedIn, Facebook, those sort of things. And they started calling front desks at hotels, telling them that the IT team needed to get in urgently to fix a problem, and was able to allow the front desk folks to give access to those computers and systems to the threat actors. And that was sort of a concerted effort across the country. We heard about that happening to multiple different standalone hotel operators as well as hotel chains. So they're always thinking of different ways to exploit both software as well as the operators, us humans. So what is insurance going to do for you? Number one, the underwriting process can help you identify issues. So we talked about those sort of base level things. It's a great checklist to go through and stress test your internal or external team. Hey, do we have these things in place? Are we doing what are considered at least the minimal best practices to help us avoid an issue? And obviously, for those who go ahead and purchase cyber coverage, you know, it's going to be getting that coverage and the expertise that comes along with it. So when we talk about cyber coverage, and Bob was mentioning, there's all sorts of different ones out there. All coverage forms are different. Some of you may be familiar with standardized forms, especially on the work comp, for example, or auto, where pretty much every carrier has the same base form. They might have different endorsements, but cyber coverage forms are all very different from one carrier to the next. So it's important to know and understand how your policy is the same or different than what you might already have or what you might need. And generally, the insurance is going to provide coverage for breach response. So that's, hey, I think someone's in my system. I need to get that breach coach in that Bob talked about. I need to get the Michaels of the world, the technical experts in to figure out what happened. It's also going to cover that first party loss. So, hey, I, the insured, am down, I can't operate my business. I have expenses in terms of having to notify people or do certain things. And it's also going to provide for that third party loss. So I have to go ahead and pay some third party because now I've impacted their business. You know, I have a contract with them, or I've caused them some problem because I'm holding information for them and now they can't operate their business, those sort of things. As we have talked about, legal, forensic, notification, and credit monitoring, you hear a lot about that, especially with folks who have had a breach involving social security numbers or other PII, personally identifiable information, getting that credit monitoring through one of the credit bureaus, sort of just keeping an eye on their status. Because obviously the biggest issue now is these threat actors, they just want money, whether that's either in Bitcoin, diverting wires, or being able to open up lines of credit in companies or individuals' accounts. Some of the things we didn't talk about, reputation loss can be in there as well. That usually requires an adverse media event, for those of you who are wondering what that is. So that's sort of, hey, the media has picked up on it. You're a big enough company, you're an important enough company in your area that there's now a news story about you having suffered an issue. And so there's going to be some funds and some policies to allow you to pay for a PR experts campaign to sort of craft a message around that. Another one that we see a lot of our clients using are the extra expense. So if you have a situation where your computer system is encrypted and actually bricked, so it's permanently damaged, you can't use it, it's turned your server into a brick, just a nice piece of metal sitting somewhere. Some of these policies will pay for new servers, new computers to get you back to where you were. Also, data recovery is an important one. You know, Michael, folks like Michael and his team, you know, it's not just getting the data unencrypted, it's also getting it back. It could be damaged, separated, you know, put in a way that it's hard for you to use without having experts come in and kind of put the pieces to the puzzle back together the way they were. Third party loss, go over that really quickly. Again, regulatory defenses and penalties in addition to data liability. So in some instances, especially where you might have operations in a state that's extremely tough on this, like New York or California, there could be certain monetary penalties for having a data breach. Also, for those of you who process credit cards, you could have payment credit card information liability where, you know, if credit cards were used to perpetrate a fraud, you know, false charges, those sort of things, that can add up quickly for you. The other thing that carriers are going to bring to the table, like Bob talked about, are the relationships. So they have sort of pre-vetted relationships with law firms, those breach coaches who are sort of experts in this field, as well as those forensic and security specialists, the people like Michael and other folks who deal with this all the time. And one of the things that we found very useful is the carriers keep a pretty strong Rolodex of who recently has worked on what sort of issues. So once they can have a quick intake and identify what your issue might be, or in particular, even who the threat actor might be, or what the type of ransomware or software attack might be, they will try to get you to those specialists who either have dealt with that recently or have a large history dealing with that sort of issue, because obviously being more familiar with it will allow, we think, for a more efficient and better outcome. The other thing is obviously pre-negotiated rates. So let's say you have a limit of $10,000 for breach coach expenses. That $10,000 is going to go a lot further through an insurance policy, because the rates that they've negotiated with those law firms or those forensic folks are going to be much lower than what's going to be available on the street. And the billing guidelines will also help hold that down. So again, helping your money go further than it otherwise would on your own. And I think that's it. I'll turn it back. I know that was a rush, but hopefully was able to give you a good high-level overview of the ever-exciting world of insurance.
All right. Hi, I'm Kevin Friedlander with the New Jersey Chamber, and we're going to go to the Q&A portion of today's presentations, which were very, had lots of information and good stuff to think about for all small business owners. The first question I see in the chat is, I believe it's about endpoint detection and response software. And it sounds like it could be pretty expensive for a small business owner. And how can small business owners afford it? And I think the question was directly how the chamber could help, but in general, how can small businesses afford it?
I'd recommend reaching out to your managed service provider or cybersecurity company to get accurate pricing. With endpoint detection, there are a lot of routers that have IDS intrusion detection built right into the router, as well as there are cybersecurity companies that have devices that you can put on your network. And what these devices do is they will map out over time what your normal amount of traffic is, what websites are normally accessed, how traffic normally flows on your network, and anything that's out of the ordinary, they will get alerted, and in turn you will get alerted to a potential breach or just something out of the ordinary is happening. But there are definitely cost-effective models for those, and managed service providers should have that information.
Okay. There was another question in there, actually, it was for me about, and you touched on it a little bit, Brad, about the reputation aspect. And I'm just curious, you got the insurance, you got the, the technology end, but there's a breach. I mean, is the reputation something that really could be the most impactful when all is said and done, and how the public perceives your company?
Yeah, I'm sure Bob has a view on it as well, but I would say I think unfortunately these attacks happen so frequently that most folks today, unless it's an issue where you're sort of deemed to have hidden something, as long as you're upfront about it, our experience has been that there hasn't been a huge reputational impact going forward to companies. I'm sure there are the exceptions that are outliers, but for the most part, people just view it as like, I'm really sorry to hear that happened to you too, because it probably happened to them previously.
In the earlier days, when we're putting together incident response plans, it was not uncommon for mid-size or larger companies to have a PR person, whether it was in-house or outside, on that team, on the incident response team. But I think as time goes on, it's just becoming so routine that, to some extent, the more you mention it in the media, the more you're reminding people that you had a breach. So there's a little bit of a pullback from the necessity to do it and the wisdom to do it.
Okay, thank you. And one more that was emailed to me was, there was so much information here. What's the first place that people should start? With the tech guy, with the lawyer, with the insurance part of it, when someone's getting off this webinar, how do you begin this process?
Well, I'll step up for Brad, and because he might be too modest to say it. I think starting with the insurance broker in part of your planning is probably the best place to go. And I think in his presentation, he mentioned a lot of issues get covered by the underwriting process. So I would probably start there, but I would say not to the exclusion of attorneys, and you really need to make sure you have the right data, privacy professionals and lawyers involved to some extent. How much they're going to get involved depends case to case.
Okay. We have one more question. We promised everyone we get off by 10, but if you don't have to collect data from someone, is that the best route? That's pretty much the question that's in the chat. And just a quick yes or no, because we have to get to Tom, because we promised everyone we'd end at 10.
Well, I'll be quick about it. These guys can talk. I think the answer is yes. Minimize the amount of data that you have, and that's going to minimize your risks.
Yeah,
Okay,
couldn't agree more. And delete it once you don't need it anymore.
okay. Everyone's in agreement. So I am going to turn it over to Tom, who's just going to wrap things up for us.
Okay, Bob, Michael, and Brad, that was very informative, very real. We've been through it here at the chamber. We know what you're talking about, and I would encourage everybody on the call today to pursue some action to hopefully mitigate any future problems they have here, because it's gonna happen to them, which was the basic drumbeat that all of you mentioned. Data security is a huge issue. It's going to get only worse, and it's scary. And as I said, we went through it here at the chamber, and it was not a fun thing to go through. So anyway, thank you all for your presentation. It was very informative, very well done. Many other issues that businesses are facing, we are going to address in a summit meeting we're having called Renew New Jersey Business Summit and Expo, March 14th and 15th in Harrah's. It's a pickup of last year's summit meeting. We will probably have close to 1,000 people in Harrah's on the 14th and 15th. Great list of speakers, impressive list, 45 speakers, 12 different panels. The governor's going to speak, all the legislative leaders are going to speak, and we're going to address many, many issues impacting the state business community at that 2-day session. We encourage all of you to go. I think Rick is putting up information in the chat box to give you ways to register. And again, it's something that I think would be extremely important to your company, just like addressing the cybersecurity issue is important to your company. So please consider joining us on the 14th and 15th of March. We thank you very much for attending today. Again, thank you to NJM Insurance Group for their ongoing support and partnership. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.